Yes, very good morning to you. It is Friday, the 9th of October, 2020. My name's Pete Fairbairn. Welcome back to the best on-ground weekday kickoff. Great to have your company. We've got 5 massive stories making waves in the world of Australian sport to dissect in just around 20 minutes. So getting through all the headlines and all the big tales. And as always, I'm joined by one of Australia's preeminent sports journos who's able to decipher the stories, find the angles you might have missed, and provide some additional insights. Up here in Brisbane with me today, Jim Tucker. How are you, Jim?
Very good, Pete. Beautiful day.
Beautiful day in Queensland, and really exciting times for rugby union fans. And that's where we're going to start today with the first Wallabies test match in over a year, set to kick off on Sunday afternoon in Wellington in New Zealand. There is the slight problem that it does come against the All Blacks, and we know what our record against our old mates is like, particularly across the ditch. But it is exciting to see test footy back. It's the first test of the Dave Rennie era. It's one of 4 in a row that we'll see the Wallabies up against the All Blacks. So talk about a baptism of fire for Dave Rennie. And our first story this morning comes from friend of the show, Sammy Phillips, in the Sydney Morning Herald. And he's got the inside word and the scoop, it appears, on who's going to be named in that starting 15 for the Wallabies. And it looks like, with that team to be announced later this morning, it looks like Dave Rennie will throw uncapped Queensland Reds trio Harry Wilson, Filippo Daugunu and Hunter Paisami straight into the starting lineup and into the Bledisloe Cup furnace. Sam Phillips also, essentially he's got the full 15 here. He's done incredibly well. So it looks like a Pete Samu, Michael Hooper, Harry Wilson back row. It looks like the halves will be Nick White and James O'Connor. Tom Banks apparently gets the opportunity at fullback, and Taniela Tupou in that hotly contested tight head prop jersey. Jim, you've watched the Reds really, really closely and covered them for a number of years. You know Wilson, Daugunu and Paisami better than most. Can you tell us a bit more about these 3 rookies? And I guess more broadly, what your impressions are of Dave Rennie's first Wallabies team?
A good starting point. I think Harry Wilson is a really terrific addition for the Wallabies. He's only 20, big, bulky, egg-eating number 8. He's just pumped himself up to over that 110 kilo mark. But it's not just that he runs hard and dents the line. He's just got a really good sense to back up, work hard off the ball, all things that Dave Rennie likes. He's just a terrific ball carter, but also someone who can sniff out a try. So really good selection there. Hunter Paisami, he's one of those Australian stories that comes from the clouds. Australian story as in he's from Auckland originally. And his father, when he was a young fella, he was small even then. And his dad got him to write on his wristband, size doesn't matter. It's all about the heart. And that's the way he plays. He runs really good angles, really hard angles. So he's someone who can run off a good James O'Connor pass and play that hard game. My concern there is that we're trying to beat the Kiwis with a smaller version of their player. So that's a little bit of a question mark there for me. And Daugunu, I can't work out why he's on the wing in a test match. To be honest, I'm a big fan of his broken field running, his exhilarating footwork, but he's just a penalty waiting to happen with a tip tackle or a bit of naivety in defence. So that's a fingers crossed job. Tom Wright is a far better winger in my eyes as a test player. That's just my view, but that's a little bit of a take on those 3 new guys. But I like O'Connor at 5'8" because he's shown how unselfish he is in his new persona this year. Try assists, line break assists, really getting other players involved. And that's a complete variation on where he was when he played against the British and Irish Lions as a young 5'8".
Yeah, I think coming into the end of Super Rugby AU, it appeared pretty apparent that O'Connor had earned the opportunity to play in that 10 jersey. Nick White probably gets there just as much on what he's achieved in seasons gone by and in his form for Exeter in the UK, which I'm sure Rennie watched really closely. He probably gets that opportunity there, and his experience will be critical. The experience in the 9, 10, 11, 12 axis is then, I suppose, quite a contrast to 13, 14, 15, where there's not a lot of test experience. You mentioned Daugunu. We'd love to see him do well. We know that He brings some different skills to that position, but he has had some trouble with his tackle technique in the past. And we saw last year in the first test between these two teams what a red card can do for a match. So hopefully, he's been working on that technique and we don't see something like that. Not only has he beaten Tom Wright for a spot, but it's important to think as well, with Tom Banks at fullback, we've seen Jack Maddox, we've seen Dane Haylett-Petty, we've seen Reece Hodgell play on the wing for the Wallabies as well. So, look, it's a big vote of confidence in Daugunu when you look at all those different players who he's beaten off for the role. And it'll be interesting to see who's named on the bench from Dave Rennie today as well. And just quickly on Harry Wilson, would you say it's the body shape of a number 8 that the Wallabies have been looking for quite some time?
Yeah, well, I mean, the best Wallabies teams have always functioned with that elite number 8, like Toto Kefu. We've been searching for another Kefu for years, turned into over a decade now. He was an exceptional player because he had that little bit of ball playing, that brutal running, that aggressive edge. So Harry Wilson is still only a formative player at 20, but really good signs from him. And in a back row that I think is a nice mix with Michael Hooper and, if it is to be, Pete Samu as the number 6. Rennie's picked on form. You have to say some of those players that he's gone with are guys that have really excelled in Super Rugby Australia competition this year. And that's a sign that Rennie's looking past reputations and he just wants the form players on the pitch.
It's not often I get one over Christy Doran, a friend of both of ours, but I did say to him on Monday I wanted Samu in that 6 jersey because he's a winner. He wins with the Brumbies. He won with the Crusaders, and that's exactly the type of mentality we want to take onto the field at the Cake Tin. Our second story this morning will stay with rugby union. It comes from Wayne Smith in the Australian, and he looks at the Rugby Championship. Of course, these two tests in New Zealand, they're taking place kind of separate to the Rugby Championship as part of the extra Bledisloe Cup matches. But the Rugby Championship is the 12-match tournament with all 4 Sanzar nations starting at the end of this month in Australia. Size of relief all round yesterday when New Zealand was able to come up with the cash, I think it is most likely, to move their final meeting with the Wallabies, which was scheduled for December 12. They've managed to move that forward to October 31, which means the players are able to get back, do their quarantine and spend Christmas Day with their families. So crisis averted there, even though we know, of course, that the Argentinians and South Africans will likely still have to miss Christmas when they head home. Well, that's if the South Africans even make it, because we know that coronavirus has been a huge strain on that nation. They've barely played any rugby. We've seen a couple of trial matches over the last couple of weeks, but that's the first rugby that any of their players have played in a number of months. And apparently they're still yet to completely finalise the decision as to whether or not they will send the Springboks to Australia, the world champion Springboks, with a decision due over the course of the weekend. I guess the concern for the Springboks is that they're putting their players at risk of whether it's injury or the emotional and mental challenge that would come with being underprepared and playing elite test match rugby. The flip side of that, of course, is that union desperately needs the funds that the Rugby Championship would generate. Do you sympathise with South African rugby and the decision they have to make, Jim? And what way do you see this one playing out?
I do sympathise with them because this year has been like no other in a society fashion, but also the way it affects sport. Even in a perfect storm, the South Africans will come into their first test against Argentina with far less rugby under their belts than they should have. And of course, you've got to remember they're pulling their team not just from South Africa, but also from Europe. So it is a problem for them. You look at someone like Faf de Klerk, the halfback, who was brilliant at the World Cup. He plays for the Sale Sharks, where they've had a coronavirus outbreak. So they're dealing with that in the English Premiership. So he's got to come from the UK. And then you have players coming from South Africa. So that quarantine system has to be really worked out. So the South Africans come into the tournament healthy, but so the rest of the competition's healthy as well. You can't get away from the bottom line, though, Pete. If South Africa are to get their money, for their broadcast deal, they have to meet the Rugby Championship requirements. As soon as any of these 4 Test nations vary the championship, they won't be getting the money they signed up for. The broadcasters are hurting as well. If South Africa pull out, suddenly the contract's broken and everyone will get less money. South Africa desperately need whatever the figure might be, the 30 million cut that they would get. So really significant. And South Africa will just turn up. That's just how it will be.
We've lost your video there, Jim, but we'll keep ploughing ahead. I don't know what's happened at that end. I think you're right, though. We will see the South Africans out here for the Rugby Championship. And he's back, and I can see again. Our third story this morning comes from NRL.com, and it comes from former Brisbane Broncos and representative great Steve Rennie, his Pearl of Wisdom column, looking at the awesome foursome who he thinks will decide the NRL sudden death semis this weekend. Rennie writes that finals football is where the big game players have the most influence, and this week there's an awesome foursome that hold their team's premiership hopes in the palms of their hand. We watched it last week with Ryan Pappenhuisen and Cameron Munster for the Storm, Jerome Luai and Nathan Cleary for the Panthers. I expect that to be the same in this week's 2 sudden death showdowns, that it will be the key men in the spine who will come into their own. 4 players he nominates in the Roosters-Raiders clash, James Tedesco and Jack Whiten as the keys. In the Parramatta-Rabbitohs clash, he nominates Clint Guthers and Cody Walker. Now, not rocket science to look at some of the most dangerous players in those teams, but the way that the NRL competition's been played at the moment, points fatigue, the new rules encourage lots of scoring. They encourage the game breakers to take the game on. It's a pretty good observation from Rennie. Do you expect lots of points? Do you expect those players to have a big impact? And how do you see those 2 matches ending up?
Well, we've seen some terrific attacking rugby league this year, it must be said. And speed is everything in rugby league. Just to turn a half break into something that is a try or a great burst of play. And I think Renou's on the money there. Like some of those game breakers, Jack Whiten, brilliant for the Raiders last weekend, a couple of tries, and he just ignites things. And I think he's the man on the field for Ricky Stewart. Stewart would be loving being the puppeteer behind a player like that who can express Ricky's own style of game on the field. I think the Raiders-Roosters game is a really interesting one. Roosters have had a couple of losses, and it's hard to switch momentum at this time of the year, even with 2 premierships behind them. Luke Keary, for mine, he's really got to step up to, he's not a Tedesco, but he's a guy that can control the game. So I'm going for the Roosters there to win that one. Parramatta, they're in the other sudden death match, but they're also playing at Bankwest Stadium, so they got a bit of that home ground momentum behind them. People are talking up South and Adam Reynolds and what he's been able to do in the halves with his partner. I'm going to go for Parramatta based on home ground there, and just as the Parramatta time, I think.
Yeah, they've been written off a fair bit for a team who finished top 4. They were pretty impressive against the Storm last week, it must be said. 2 cracking matchups there. We turn to the Australian and a story from Courtney Walsh for our penultimate story today around the AFL. And Brisbane Lions legend Simon Black, who's the Premiership Cup ambassador and taking the Premiership Cup throughout Queensland at the moment. He's had some interesting comments to make yesterday that he thinks that the Brisbane Lions and the Gold Coast Suns could prove to be destination clubs moving forward as a result of the extraordinary circumstances of the COVID bubbles this year. We saw yesterday that Essendon forward Joe Danaher has nominated Brisbane as his club of choice. That's despite last year the fact he was looking to get to the Sydney Swans. Gold Coast rising further up the ladder. Brisbane Lions, they're through to a prelim after a second successful season in a row. Simon Black says, I'd like to think the Suns and the Lions, it's probably been the best 3 months possible from a recruiting perspective. All the Victorian players have spent winter on the south coast of Queensland, and it's been an amazing winter weather-wise. Do you agree with Simon Black that Queensland's a new destination for AFL clubs, AFL players to potentially ply their trade, not just because of the way those teams are building, but also the relative anonymity, I guess, in comparison with living in the Victorian AFL bubble?
Well, I think some of the St Kilda boys who are based in Noosa are going, how long has this been happening? Middle of winter and freezing down in Melbourne, but absolutely balmy beach weather in Queensland. So that only plays a part. Players are attracted to success more than anything. So the reason Danaher and others like him will be attracted to the Brisbane Lions is because Chris Fagan is doing a brilliant job as coach, and the Lions are elite now, not just for one season, but a couple of seasons. They're really on the map. If you put a team in Hawaii and gave everyone mojitos non-stop every night of the week, and they came last, people wouldn't go there. Players are attracted by success. So I don't see that the spike will be as great for the Gold Coast Suns. I just see, again, they're a struggling outfit. It's all relative, their improvement. So I see the Brisbane Lions being able to attract some good players, but not so much the Gold Coast Suns.
I guess with the Suns, they've heavily backed their own youth, and I guess they will continue to look to retain their top talent just as much as trying to attract big star names, and maybe look to top up with some free agents. We saw what they did with someone like a Hugh Greenwood this year, who's been a wonderful fit for them. And to your point, the weather's not a new thing. Everyone's always known it's nice in Queensland in the winter, but perhaps experiencing it firsthand may twist the arm of a few people. I think you look at a Lachie Neale and the fact that he chose to come to Brisbane from Fremantle 2 or 3 years ago, and the impact he's had on that football club, and that was long before a COVID bubble. But it is good to see Queensland performing strongly in AFL. I think it puts the pressure on the other football codes up here to stay vigilant and not rest on their laurels. And it's fantastic to see. Our final story this morning comes from AFL great Wayne Carey in The Age. We're not going to necessarily look at it purely through an AFL lens, but I thought it was a really interesting column around culture and the use of the terminology culture in a football club. I'll read you a couple of opening paragraphs here from Wayne Carey. It says, when it comes to footy buzzwords, culture has certainly done the rounds. More recently, it seems to have become a common way to justify a player's decision to seek a trade without scratching far beyond the surface. This week, we've heard it numerous times in a trade sense when it comes to Essendon. If we're to believe the commentary around Adam Saad, he wants out of the Bombers because of concerns over his role and losing faith in the direction and culture of the club, which is an intriguing one because does he know it's going to be any better at Carlton? After a long rebuild, they haven't exactly delivered on their blueprint for success. So on exposed form, how can he really know the Blues culture? Kerry goes on to say, at what point is it the responsibility of the players to change a culture and what defines a great culture? He argues there are countless businesses, organisations and footy clubs that have been extremely successful without having great cultures, and talks to the West Coast Eagles of the mid-2000s who had all sorts of trouble off the field yet remained so successful on the field. What do you think makes a good culture in a footy club, Jim?
I think connectiveness certainly does. I'd give the Brisbane Lions example. During the peak COVID-19 period when all the players, interstate players, went home, Chris Fagan took it on himself to make 47 phone calls or Zoom chats every week to be personally in touch with every player in his squad. So Hugh McCluggage, who was back on the dairy farm at Warrnambool, Chris Fagan got in touch with him just to find out what was going on in his life and whatever. And I think that's part of good culture, where you take charge. Winning creates an energy all of its own within a sporting team. If you surf a wave, team culture can come along with it, and it builds it. It just fires up and ignites certain parts within a team. You go wider than some of the Australian sports. You look at Leicester, say, winning the EPL in 2015-16. They had an amazing team culture. They were the underdogs, and that bonded them, and they had a marvellous one-off, perhaps 1 in 100-year strike there where they won the title against all odds. And a lot of that was team culture. Justin Langer with the Australian cricket team, part of what he's tried to do with his team is invest in a cultural change for the Australian cricket team from the stain of ball tampering and sandpaper gate. So really significant shifts in team performance can come from team culture, but it's invisible. Where do you see it? So someone's got to be able to judge what good culture is.
Yeah, of course, there's the famous anecdote of the All Blacks sweeping the sheds. And sometimes you're also blessed with phenomenal athletes. We use that West Coast Eagles example. I think to your point, it's connectivity. It's genuinely buying into the other people within your organisation. And you can have a fantastic team culture and still not be a very good team if you simply don't have the talent. That's the reality of it. One final example I'd like to point out is one I saw just yesterday, which was posted on the Wallabies Facebook page, which was Marika Koroibete and Filippo Daugunu leading the entire squad in a Fijian hymn, and every single player singing along to that Fijian hymn, and Dave Rennie standing at the back of the room just watching on. And I thought to myself, that's exactly the type of story we've heard about Dave Rennie. We heard Lukan Salakai Lotto said yesterday to the media, Rennie loves a sing-song. That type of different culture that, or the mana from his time at the Chiefs that he might be bringing to the Wallabies. From the outside looking in, it's impossible not to be excited by that. Jim, that's all we've got time for. It's been fantastic catching up with you as always. It's a huge weekend of sport. I'll tell you what, there is plenty happening. I look forward to catching up with you again over the coming days and weeks to find out more about what's been happening, particularly in the Bledisloe Cup, and hope you have a fantastic weekend.
Let's fire it up with the Bledisloe playing the Kiwis 4 times in 5 weeks. That's something else. So hopefully the Wallabies can get rugby fans and the general sports fan behind them again.
Absolutely. Very well said indeed. Thanks for watching and listening to the best On Ground Weekday Kickoff. It's been another fantastic week. Looking forward to seeing you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.